Hello, everyone. Gabby here.
And I'm Stucky. Not Brenna.
Not Brenna. And welcome back to the Mystery of Everything podcast. So today we're recording because Brenna can make it over. I'm kind of sick. We just got back from, Denmark.
Yeah. And France.
I was like, oh my God, where were we?
And Sweden, briefly, for a brief moment in Sweden.
It's been very busy. So we're just going to do an episode today. And then next week we'll be back with Brenna. But before we begin, I just wanted to let you all know that we now have a Patreon where you can find bonus episodes and ad-free episodes. So if that's something you're into, the link is in the description. Now, onto the episode. Today's episode, I want to cover it's a mystery, an unsolved mystery, that's a little bit different from what we usually cover.
You mean on the mystery of everything you're covering? No way.
The thing is, once you get into it, it's not that mysterious. And I think it's one of those overhyped, sensationalized mysteries. Yeah, it is mysterious, but it's not that mysterious once you find out all of the details, if that makes sense, you know? So this is the story of the Lost Avengers, which sounds really cool. This was a group of 5 planes collectively known as Flight 19 that disappeared. The disappearance of Flight 19 remains one of the great aviation.
Well, hey,
the great bird
it's
mystery.
a bird. It's a great bird mystery. It's
the
true.
great aviation mysteries of today, and is responsible for beginning. Well, it didn't necessarily begin it, but it was kind of at the point, at the center of fueling the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. It definitely added a lot to it.
Isn't the Bermuda Triangle where all the ships and everything go missing?
Yes, allegedly go missing.
Allegedly.
Yes, that the one and only. So this story begins at 2:10 p.m. on December 5th, 1945.
Very specific.
Yeah, very, very. I mean, was the date not supposed to be specific?
I mean, you could have just added in that it was just a nice winter morning. You know,
the time is
snow
important.
was fresh on the ground. The birds were chirping in the air as they. Well, no. I mean, it's winter, not.
The time is important because timestamps kind of tell you where they are at certain points because it's all about location, direction, and time.
True.
It's aviation. Come on. So, 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers left a naval air station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Some facts about TBM Avenger bombers: they were the standard torpedo bomber utilized by the Navy during World War II. They were also utilized for glide bombing, in close air support, for reconnaissance, and they were used as light transport. They were manufactured by General Motors Eastern Aircraft Division and had a climb rate of 2,060 feet per minute, a ceiling of 30,100 feet, and a range of 1,010 miles.
That is actually quite a long time here for usually you wouldn't really expect something to have that kind of range.
Yeah.
Especially back in the day.
Yep. So these bombers, they were all collectively known as Flight 19. And they were led by a very experienced, he had a lot of experience, navigator by the name of Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor. Now, Charles Taylor was a man that dedicated his life to his job. He was a pilot from a very young age. He obtained great leadership qualities. He was also a veteran of several combat missions in World War II's Pacific Theater. So this was not a newbie by any means.
Oh, he was experienced, and especially naval air warfare. That was huge over there in the Pacific.
Especially during World War II. So he had 2,500 flying hours and multiple combat tours. Taylor got his wings in 1942 at the Naval Air Station Corpus Christi, which was close to where he grew up. He was a flight instructor at first, but then he moved on to flying convoy protection patrols in Kingfishers out of the Naval Air Station in Key West. In 1944, he joined Torpedo Squadron 7 and he transitioned to the TBM bombers. His air group deployed with the newly commissioned carrier Hancock and saw extensive combat in the latter half of 1944. In 1945, he was back with the training command, having recently transferred from the Naval Air Station in Miami to Fort Lauderdale, where our story takes place. And that fateful day, he was leading Flight 19 to complete a 3-hour exercise, which was called the Navigation Problem Number 1. Now, this exercise, there was nothing special about it. It was a very routine one.
It was a basic one. It was one that they were always used to doing.
And also, it was Flight 19, which meant there were 18 flights that day of people doing the exact same thing, essentially. So this was very simple. Literally, all they had to do was take off, ascend, head eastward over the Atlantic, conduct some practice bombing runs, and then they'd make their return back to their starting point.
It was literally just doing a little loop.
Yeah. So they had a triangle, well, a little bit more than a loop. And I'll have the maps online to show you guys exactly where they went. The turns were very specific and important to their run. They had a triangular flight path And that meant they would head from Florida to a place called Hens and Chicken Shoals, where they would conduct their practice bombing runs. Then they would fly back to base. The interesting thing is that there are some accounts that came up in my research of Taylor asking that day, like he showed up 30 minutes before he was supposed to fly. And when he showed up, he asked to be relieved prior to flying, saying he didn't want to take this flight out, but there were no other instructors and they were like, I'm sorry, you have to do it. So he had to do it.
So wait, some of the sources say this, others just don't mention it. Is it
Well,
something
it
that's
also
real?
came up in the official investigation.
Oh.
So because during the investigation, you'll see later on, there were a lot of things that pointed at, okay, something was up with Taylor. And the fact that he showed up and immediately was like, hey, I don't want to take this flight.
That immediately is going to be something that raises some flags.
Exactly.
You're going to wonder what is actually going on.
Exactly. Especially like right before, you'd think you'd tell someone that earlier.
Yeah, it's not like he was sitting around on base all day just waiting for everything to happen. He shows up literally 30 minutes before everything is supposed to happen. There has to be more.
His reasoning was he just didn't want to take that flight out. So obviously something was weird. So each of the Avengers bombers that flew out that day, they carried 3 men, except for one that only had 2. Each man had about 300 hours of flight under their belt. So they were also they were learning, but they weren't new to flying. And that day, everything started out pretty normal for them. They were following pretty much the same path as the previous 18 flights that day. They arrived at Hens and Chicken Shoals about 20 minutes after taking off at around 2:30 p.m.
Wait, so that is really fast. They literally reached their destination in just 20 minutes? And that's it?
Yeah, because they just had to do the bombing run. And they carried out their practice bombing without a hitch. But when the flight turned to head on to the second leg of their flight, which was so they had to do the practice bombing run, then they were going to fly in a different direction, and they were going to make a really interesting flight path. But when the flight turned to head on to that second leg, which would take them over the Grand Bahama Island, before they flew southwest back to base, something went wrong. The issue is that to this day, no one is exactly sure what happened. And if you go looking into it, you will find a lot of accounts. Some of them, they don't necessarily conflict, but some have way more information. Some of them might conflict, and some of them get everything in a different order. So I had to go through and kind of piece together everything that was consistent with all of the stories. And that's what you would find here. And also, I do have every single source linked, so you guys can go in and look at it yourselves, because it is a little bit confusing, but I'll do my best to break it down. So,
oh boy.
Once they made that second turn, they turned onto the second leg, the patrol all became disoriented. And the very experienced Lieutenant Taylor, he was convinced that his compass was malfunctioning and the planes were all flying in the wrong direction. Around the same time, it started to storm throughout that run. So now they're disoriented. They don't know where they're going. And while they're out there, the weather is getting worse and worse, which was actually pointed out right before they started their run, when he was like, I don't want to do this flight. They were like, well, we're going to do the flight because the weather's fine. So let's just do it. But the patrols that came in right before were like, the ocean's picking up a little bit, but it's still pretty clear. They should be good to do it.
In other words, potentially from the beginning, it might not be anything that was funny business. He literally could have just had a bad feeling about the way that the weather might have been turning.
Potentially. But it started storming and it caused limited visibility and less than optimal flying conditions for Flight 19 throughout the course of them being just completely fucking lost. So one of the pilots said over the radio, and I quote, I don't know where we are. We must have gotten lost after that last turn. In addition...
That's a direct quote.
Yeah. In addition, the radio started to malfunction. There was static through the speakers, interference in the cockpits, and Lieutenant Taylor was, as they were lost and trying to figure out where they were going, he was just growing more and more frustrated as he was trying to communicate with his men. Taylor was heard announcing, we cannot be sure where we are. Repeat, cannot see land. And then they lost contact for a while. When they could be heard again, he was heard saying, we can't find west. Everything is wrong. We can't be sure of any direction. Everything looks strange, even the ocean. So the first person to really hear what was happening to Flight 19 was Lieutenant Robert F. Cox, who immediately let the air station know what was happening, and then he got into contact with Taylor. Taylor responded, both my compasses are broken, and I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm over land, but it's broken. I'm sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down I am. Now, the issue with what Taylor was saying And this is something that comes up time and time again. It will come up in the investigation. What he was saying made absolutely no sense. So he had been over hens and chicken shoals located in the Bahamas, literally less than an hour earlier. It was a large leap, an insane leap for him to believe that his planes had somehow drifted hundreds of miles off course and ended up in the Florida Keys.
And that was less than an hour earlier. Hold on. These were TBMs, you said, right?
Yes.
How fast was a TBM capable of going?
See, that's a great question. I'm not sure. Maybe you can look it up.
Okay. I got to look this up right now. Let's see. Hold on. It was a TBM
with that
bomber
disparity, because I guess with the broken up islands, you'll see throughout the episode, he keeps going, oh, the islands look broken up. They have to be the Keys. They have to be the Keys. And I think that was one of the key issues with this whole thing is he was fully convinced he was somewhere that he absolutely was not.
Okay, its max speed was 276 miles per hour, but its cruising speed, which is more likely what they were at, was around 147. Meaning, technically, if it was 200 miles per hour away, it could be possible, but
there were also winds and other stuff, and they were, I don't know,
maybe it's kind of cutting it close, probably. I don't know.
Like, they would have had to turn and then book it down there with favorable conditions, you know?
Yeah, no, I understand.
And it was less than an hour. It wasn't the full hour either. So this led many to believe that 27-year-old Taylor, who had just transferred to Fort Lauderdale, he may have confused some of the islands of the Bahamas for the Keys. Now, for pilots, especially very seasoned and experienced veteran pilots, the protocol was to fly west towards the mainland if you're lost in the Atlantic. A senior instructor over the radio advised Taylor to fly north to return to the Florida mainland. But when the instructor asked Taylor for his altitude so that he could fly south to meet up with them and guide them, but Taylor replied that he was at 2,300 feet, but now knew where he was and that they should not come after him. But with how disoriented Taylor became, he assumed that he was over the Gulf of Mexico and that he needed to fly northeast instead. And the decision to do this was exactly what would lead to Flight 19 flying further out to sea.
Because if he was over the Bahamas instead of...
He just changed direction, flying away from land. So Taylor, after some time, not finding anything, requested a radar sweep out of Miami to track them, as he reported that their turn on the second leg did not put them over expected landmarks and that they were experiencing the compass failures. The senior instructor instructed Taylor to activate his plane's homing gear as there was a prevailing crosswind. Around 4:26 p.m., Port Everglades Air Sea Rescue heard Taylor announce that he was flying through 3,500 feet with his emergency IFF, which is Identification Friend or Foe, activated so that he would be visible on radar. Port Everglades tried to get Fort Lauderdale to activate their radar, and different locations across were notified asking for help in locating Flight 19 that day. But Florida had poor teletype communications back then, and these calls weren't as effective as they essentially could have been. In addition, the static in communications over the training frequency added even more communication issues.
So all these places that should have been able to help, all these places that should have been able to do something, they just weren't receiving the messages in the first place to do so?
It's 1945.
Well, yeah.
And there were a lot of dead zones. It wasn't anybody's fault, really. It was 1945 technology.
Oh, that is also true. And we also have to consider that, I mean, I think I've talked about this before with the whole thing of Florida not being built really until the 1950s with air conditioning.
But you also have to remember that didn't we lose that plane the other day? And it was 2023.
Yeah.
And like a whole ass Air Force plane was gone. Missing. So really.
Anything could happen.
Seriously. So when the senior instructor checked in again with Taylor, he reported that he was now at 4,500 feet, but the fading sound of his communication showed the instructor that Taylor was moving away from him and not at all approaching him at the Florida Keys. At 4:30 p.m., the Fort Lauderdale staff knew that there was no way that Taylor could have flown over the Keys, and they told him to fly towards the sun until he reached the mainland. But at 4:45, Taylor said he was directing his flight along the course he was on for 45 minutes before he would turn north. He just wanted to confirm that he was not over the Gulf of Mexico. Like, this dude is fucking stubborn.
Why would he do? Hold on. Also, wasn't he already flying north? I thought that's what he would be.
I guess he just wanted to continue flying north.
What the?
So, since his communication was fading, Search and Rescue asked Taylor to switch to the Search and Rescue frequency, but he refused to do this since he needed to keep contact with his men. And, like, I guess that's reasonable, but your men can't help you navigate at this point, or you're not listening to them. So maybe keep contact with the people who are trying to get you home. I don't know. Again, I wasn't in his shoes, but everything he did was so iffy, man. I feel bad.
This seems unnecessarily stubborn. Like, it's literally the definition of not stopping and asking for directions, but you are flying a bunch of people around in the sky.
So at 4:56, search and rescue again requested that Taylor activate his homing gear. And at this point, Taylor either didn't respond and he didn't do it, but he directed his men to fly due east for 10 minutes.
East, wait, hold on. But if he was over the Keys,
I think he was trying to change direction at this point because maybe people were arguing. And I know for a fact, as I'm getting into it, so a lot of his pilots that were with him, they more than likely realized what was happening. And they were trying to tell him, because over the radio, one could be heard saying, if we would just fly west, we would get home. But Taylor kept on going. When he did eventually turn around to start heading west, he changed his mind shortly after and he changed direction again. He was recorded as saying, we didn't go far enough east. We may as well just turn around and go east again. So I can only imagine the frustration of the pilots that were with him. And it's believed that one plane may have even broken off and flew in a different direction than him, but the rest kept on following him. That story about the plane breaking off was mentioned in one article, and I couldn't find anything to verify that. There was nothing saying nothing to support it. It was just speculation. Just a heads up. The thing is, his men had to follow him. Like Navy Code of Honor or whatever required them to follow their commander. So
even in stubbornness and yeah.
I don't even know if he was being stubborn. Like something may have been wrong. Something may have been going on. It was all very confusing, you know? So the sad thing is that by this time, radio triangulation had located Taylor to be north of the Bahamas, over the open Atlantic, and very far to the east of central Florida. But for some reason, this was not relayed to him. At 6:04 p.m., Taylor suggested another turn to the east, and unfortunately, his men had to follow his orders.
So they would just go further and further out into the ocean.
So the sad thing for all of them at this point was that their fuel was running low, and Taylor was heard over the radio getting his men ready for a crash landing. He was quoted as saying, all planes close up tight, we'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together. Shortly after, Flight 19's communication was cut to static. And that's the last we heard of any of the lost Avengers. Now, there's a lot to discuss with this because the series of events that I just described, it just covered the crash itself and a lot of confusing things throughout and leading up to the crash. From this one incident, the search, which I'm getting into next, also had a mystery of its own that kind of added to it. And due to this mystery with that plane disappearing and the patrol disappearing, and then a bunch of different ships disappearing, it
really cemented the idea of the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah, literally. It was a recipe for legend. How legends are born. So let's get into it. The first thing we have to look at are the exact events that happened right after the disappearance. So, of course, the Navy jumped into action, launching a search for the missing patrol. Communication was lost sometime during the hours of 6 and 7 p.m. And by around 7:30 p.m., a search was launched with a pair of PBM Marina flying boats that were launched from an air station just north of Fort Lauderdale.
But this is also 6 or 7 p.m. in winter, meaning it's dark by that point. It's not like it's the middle of summer or anything, and there's potentially some light.
And also it was storming as well, right? Because it was raining.
Oh,
so
Lord.
It's just not ideal conditions. So some quick info on this PBM Mariner flying boat is that they were one of the last known patrol aircrafts that were utilized in World War II. It was the world's largest twin-engine flying boat. And eventually, after many different variants, the Marina was modified to the final version, the PBM-5, which was utilized to make the P-5M Marlin, which became the last flying boat to be used by the new U.S. Navy. Out of all 1,366 of the Mariners that were constructed, there's only one that survives fully intact to this day. And when I figure out where it is, I am sprinting to see it in person. So back to the search. Out of the 2 Mariners that took off at 7:30 p.m., by 7:50 p.m., one of them simply vanished off the radar.
That's it? It was just gone?
It was just gone. So that specific Mariner actually had 13 men aboard. And their remains, along with the remains of the boat, were never found.
Wait a minute, what?
Yeah.
Not even after that. Not with this actual search crew. They wouldn't send out. Well, I guess they would have sent out another thing. But they just never found it.
The thing about mariners, though, is that this one mystery is solvable, more than likely. Shortly after takeoff, it is believed that this seaplane may have exploded since they did have a reputation of being accident prone.
Wait, you're not just gonna go and shove it, like just reveal this? Like, okay, we may know what happened. It could have exploded.
No, literally. That's literally what more than likely happened. More than likely. They were even nicknamed flying gas tanks due to the fact that they were known for catching on fire. The theory that this plane exploded has potentially been confirmed by a civilian merchant ship that reported seeing a fireball and finding oil in the ocean where it was sighted, where the fireball was sighted. So more than likely it exploded, spilled oil, and just sank like a rock.
You know how you said from the beginning, it's like, oh, there's only one of these planes left. I'm not looking at the situation. I'm thinking, I can probably understand why there's only one left.
Here's the thing, though. Aviation at this point, like, wasn't World War II one of the... I know World War I had planes, but World War II was really like the era.
Oh, it was. Especially, remember how we were talking about
aviation warfare.
Yeah. Remember how we were talking about the guy from here, the actual leader of the initial group that went lost, how he was a pilot out in the Pacific?
Yes.
The Pacific, which everyone thinks like, oh, yes, the naval war with the Japanese. That thing was not won via ships. I mean, it kind of was.
The Battle of Midway?
Yeah, like the aircraft carriers were the determining factor where people thought in World War I, okay, battleships, big heavy ships, these big things with big booming guns. That's what is going to win the war. And then what they found going into World War II was no, naval aviation. It was bombers. It was these kinds of things, these dive bombers and torpedo boats. These were the things that were going to be capable of changing the tide of war, because you could have a dozen planes versus one ship with way less investment. And that ends up being way more effective at destroying an enemy target than trying to shoot with your own ship with thousands of men aboard.
Yeah, so apparently the Battle of Midway was fought almost entirely with aircraft.
Yes.
So, and the US apparently destroyed Japan's first land carrier strength and most of its best trained naval pilots. So.
Yes, because they had already invested most of their forces in battleship. Essentially, they had invested in the traditional sense of the word. And why they did have carriers, they did have these things, the US had invested way more heavily in them, and it just completely outmatched them and outpaced them.
That makes a lot of sense. But yeah, that's kind of the reason potentially why there were so many accidents. And you'll see later on just how many people died in this area, this training area, due to the fact that it was the most intensive years of training. And they were using a whole bunch of new tech.
Oh, yeah.
And different types of, planes and whatnot. And they didn't have the navigation equipment that we have today. So they literally had to know what time it was from like a watch and like where they're going from a compass. So that sounds terrible.
What I don't understand, though, is that like from the beginning when he first got lost, and it's like, okay, they know that he is moving further away because it's getting it's fading out more. Like it's you're clearly moving away from the signal, not closer to it.
He wasn't listening to them.
Yeah.
Like they were telling him where to turn and he was not listening to anyone. So that's suspicious.
Yeah.
But again, these are the records from the Navy. So I don't know, So after losing a patrol and a seaplane, the Navy dispatched more than 300 boats and aircraft combined to look for the missing vessels. They spent 5 days and searched more than 300,000 square miles of territory and found nothing. It's like they had just vanished, is what Navy Lieutenant David White said. He also said, "We had hundreds of planes out looking, and we searched over land and water for days, and nobody ever found the bodies or any debris." The investigation that was launched by the Navy also turned up empty-handed. The argument that I mentioned earlier of Taylor confusing the Bahamas for the Florida Keys still didn't explain how they became as disoriented as they did. The Navy's investigation board ended up landing on the patrol being lost due to, quote, causes or reasons unknown.
Man, wow, that is perhaps the most specific reason. I'm really glad that we came down to this explanation that fully encapsulates
That's why it's a
everything.
Mystery. That's the definition of mystery.
You are right. I know that, but still.
So it really was a baffling situation. Someone as experienced as Taylor was previously flying missions in the Pacific Theater. So for him to become that disoriented right off the coast of Florida was baffling to everyone that examined the case. One of their early findings was that Taylor faced, quote, mental aberration. Like, he just wasn't mentally functioning well during this flight, but his mother challenged this. And so the finding was removed. It removed any direct blame to Taylor due to inconclusive evidence, which I get that. We can
but
look
we're
at
also
this.
talking about direct blame.
But we can look at this and be like, oh, he did it. But we weren't there. There's absolutely no way for us to know what the heck happened. You know?
Except for him not listening to the blatant instructions that they were giving.
They were having communication issues as well. Who knows if he was even hearing? One account said that actually during the flight, he may have given up command to another one of the pilots. But again, couldn't really validate that. I can 100% verify that. But if he did, maybe something was physically wrong with him, you know?
Okay.
But again, if something was physically wrong with him at that point, when his men be like, okay, we know where to go. So again, super confusing stuff. We weren't there. No way to know. So given the communications that the Navy had, they had a hard time not blaming Taylor in some capacity. Due to the continuous faulty assessments after a routine compass malfunction, which most pilots would have been, with his experience, would have been able to navigate through regardless, you know? Like, your compass is broken. There's other ways to tell. Like, you know, your your granddad was a pilot, right?
Oh yeah, he was.
And your mom was like,
pilot.
oh yeah, no, he can absolutely just stand outside and tell you where north was, because that's how, you know, you're a pilot. That's how you navigate.
And
like, you would need to know this stuff.
Storm potentially rolling in, they could quite literally just go and like they move away from it. It's not like they were flying in the middle of a storm. They would have been able to first locate where what direction they were heading in the first place.
But again, who knows? They were unsure if he was absent or even inattentive during his pre-flight briefing. They were baffled about why he asked to be excused from leading the flight that day. Oh my gosh, speaking is hard. From leading the flight that day. They weren't sure if he was mentally or physically impaired during the flight, and they were unsure why, if his compass was malfunctioning, he just didn't simply pass command to another plane with a functional compass. Especially since there were other pilots in his patrol that were recorded as saying they needed to go west. The other issue is that Taylor also had records of previously being lost during his Pacific missions, and he had to ditch to the sea. So I've used this term twice. If you don't know what ditching to the sea, it's not crashing, like you land in the ocean, essentially. So he had to ditch to the sea and be rescued 2 out of the 3 times. If he had navigational issues and he was new to the area, maybe that was the issue. Like, it could just probably be as simple as that. Like, the Pacific Theater, though, like, we can't really fault him.
Especially, well, I mean, the Pacific is way
is
more
a different place,
to.
And he was in battle, you know? Like, I'd probably ditch the sea just because I didn't want to fight.
Yeah.
But don't quote me on that if I ever decide to sign up to the military. Do quote me on that if I ever get drafted. She's untrustworthy. Will be a terrible pilot or a military person. What? I don't want to get drafted, bro. Have you seen me? One loud noise and it's game over. I'll cry. Game over. So anyway. Listen. So there were other concerns when it came to the flight's actions. So no other members of the patrol used their rescue radio frequency or their plane's ZBX receivers, and these receivers would have helped them locate Navy radio towers on land. There were points where the pilots were told to switch their receivers on, but they didn't hear or acknowledge that message. There were so many questions and unfortunately not very many answers. No one really knows what happened that day in the air, and the ruling of unknown reasons, of course, is an answer that wasn't satisfactory to many.
Naturally, yeah, like I'm not satisfied from that. Like, I mean, I'm just more frustrated with him than anything else. But then again, as you said, we don't know if he actually heard anything. But he was responding to other stuff though, right?
He asked to be excused. Like, what if he just was not feeling well? You know? Like, who functions fully well when they're sick? Not me. So anyway, the lack of information and the mystery surrounding it is where the many conspiracies and theories behind the disappearance come into play. Obviously, when something strange happens, people try to think of logical or supernatural ways to explain the phenomena. As we see a lot on the show, when people aren't able to logically explain something, they will find other supernatural ways to explain it. And this has been something that occurs repeatedly throughout history. In the 60s and 70s, writers such as Vincent Gaddis and Charles Berlitz helped popularize the idea that Flight 19 had been destroyed by the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle, sometimes called the Devil's Triangle, is an area of 500,000 square miles that is off the southeastern tip of Florida. According to History.com, it's the area where Christopher Columbus sailed on his first voyage to the New World and where he reported a great flame of fire that crashed into the sea on the night, that night, and then a strange light appeared in the distance a few weeks later. Christopher Columbus also complained about erratic compass readings, but this may have been explained because at that time, the Bermuda Triangle may have been one of the few places on Earth where true north and magnetic north actually lined up. So if you're wondering about the difference, true north is a fixed point on the globe, while the magnetic north is the direction that a compass needle points to as it aligns with the Earth's magnetic field. The reason that I use the words at that time in regards to where they line up is because the North Pole shifts and changes over time in response to changes in the Earth's magnetic core. So it's not a fixed point, right?
So being right there on the equator where everything is right at the middle, this
Might have
potentially
messed
has the
it
issue to
up.
create some problems.
Potentially. We'll have to figure it out. Maybe when we find out where it lines up, we go there. See what happens. For funsies, don't you have a navigational compass from the olden days?
I do. One of the gifts that I've gotten here. So I have both a Victorian a telescope, for one of those ones that you can fold out to view, like a ship captain's telescope. And I also have a compass.
I don't know. We keep everybody in the family keeps gifting you these things. Are they trying to send you on a voyage? Or are they telling you to
Are you kidding me? If that is your way of saying I need you to go and find a Northwest Passage, sure.
Oh, it's already been found. You have to find something else. I'm so sorry.
Okay, I'll find more dead bodies in the Northwest Passage, of which I'm sure there's still probably a lot.
You need a submarine.
Then I think I know what we're doing.
Oh my God. You literally could spin around in our house and get lost.
In your eyes.
No, you literally have the worst navigational skills.
I get lost in your eyes.
Okay, well, that's sweet. That's sweet. I miss Brenna. She doesn't hit on me on the podcast.
Are you sure about that?
I don't know, actually. I feel Brenna, if you're listening. Mwah. Okay, so the Bermuda Triangle legend may have also arisen from speculation that Shakespeare's The Tempest was based on a real-life Bermuda shipwreck. However, in the 20th century, some cargo ship disappearances, these specifically the USS Cyclops and two sister ships, they occurred without a trace and added to this mystery. In addition, to a few more cases of disappearing or abandoned vessels in this area. So essentially everything was kind of getting lost here. Don't know why. Maybe it was bad weather. Maybe they got there and were I don't like the vibes and they abandoned ship. I don't know what may have occurred. Maybe it was pirates. Maybe in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the submarine was just kidnapping the people on the boats.
Maybe
I don't know.
Sky pirates that got them.
There's lots of theories since we're throwing stuff out. Since everyone's throwing stuff out. But basically, by the time the disappearance of Flight 19 rolled around, people ran with it, okay? And then later on, obviously, people are going to obsess over this. They're like, oh yeah, did you ever hear about? And that's how legends and conspiracies start.
Yeah, it's one of those things, especially since this is even in the days prior to the internet. No one is going to be looking anything up. And I know that it sounds bad for me to say that people are obviously going to verify information in the modern day and age with the internet.
I'm assuming they didn't verify information back then because it would involve writing a letter to a primary source. And that sounds time consuming. Where are you even going to find him?
Yeah, all you really need is one bad newspaper article and an entire section of a region is going to believe something here that they have no idea what is actually going on.
Oh my gosh. Actually, I did do the alien, this alien story around Christmas. And it was one journalist who just fueled that fire of aliens being in the area. And it actually brought a booming tourism industry to the area. But that one guy just kept writing articles and books and changing the story and making it seem way more mysterious than it was. And everybody believed him. I don't know, man. If I were a journalist back in the day, I'd have some fun. Anyway,
wait a minute. Hold on. You can't just finish off that sentence by saying that you would have some fun.
I would have some fun. Are Are you kidding me?
What is your definition of having fun in this circumstance? What kind of mystery are you propagating that you're just going to use? Are you going to kind of slowly expand upon it to see how much you could get people to believe before dipping?
Yes. You know me. You know me. You, in your own words, you always say, Gabby, it's so hard to tell when you're joking and being serious because I just walk that line constantly.
Yeah, I also can't really read subtext.
The constant line between satire and reality, you know? So
yeah.
I'm just saying, who knows? Who knows? I just keep it going as long as I can.
And that concerns me.
Well, obviously I can't do it now because A, I'm not a journalist, and B, I'm not mean. But back in the day, might have been a different type of gal.
Oh my God.
Anyway, once the initial articles were written and published by pulp magazines, more books and fictional stories with the area at the center popped up and drove the theory to growth in popularity. In addition, books about the disappearance of Flight 19 included other types of mysterious phenomena as theories to the disappearance. For example, we have magnetic anomalies.
Like in the case of the whole thing with the compass.
Yes. Parallel dimensions and alien abductions were theories that were thrown out. In fact, in 1977, a film called Close Encounters of the Third Kind showed Flight 19 as being abducted by aliens and carried to Mexico.
Of course they did.
Because why not? It seems logical.
That also would really upset. Can you imagine like a movie comes out that is like saying that this thing totally happened here or that it was aliens?
And it's like your dad or
family
someone.
members? Yeah, literally. That is what, 30 years previously? The children of those people, like maybe you're 6 years old and your dad went off as this pilot and now he's gone forever at that point. And so at the age of 37, this movie comes out and you're just like, wow, hey, thanks for reminding me that I don't have a dad and accusing like aliens of taking him. Thanks.
Yeah, that'd be kind of messed up.
That's why
I hate, when there's a tragedy and then all these conspiracies spring up around said tragedy, it fundamentally pisses me the fuck off because those are people's relatives. Those are people.
Or when Netflix goes and does exactly like with those dramas where they create a drama of of some kind of like murder case. It's not just
Netflix, though. It'd be like Netflix or Hulu or something and that's why people are always like, oh, cover this murder that happened or this crime. And you have to do it in such a way where it's not disrespectful and you don't add speculation and conspiracy to the case, which, I don't know. It's really dicey because you don't want to, because these are people.
Agreed. Yeah, they are.
They have to be handled with, and these are like, when you're talking about somebody like Alexander the Great, obviously you shouldn't change his history, right? Netflix looking at you. But it was forever ago. His relatives don't even know who they are. So you're fine. But when it's more recent stuff where you can actively see the person they're related to, maybe don't make stories up.
When people do that kind of thing for wild theories within literally a generation.
Yeah. Kind of not great. Unless their family is a conspiracy theorist, in which case, go for it. Go off. So anyway, as for what actually happened to Flight 19, well, it more than likely ran out of gas and they ditched into the rough Atlantic Ocean. Unfortunately, they would have been out too deep in a rough ocean and the planes would have been lost along with the men inside. Cold water and rough seas means that the planes would have quickly sank to the bottom, which would explain why patrols couldn't find them.
Yeah, because this is also literally the dead of winter.
Yeah, and hypothermia would more than likely have taken them out because Atlantic Ocean is cold. It is freezing.
Oh, yeah,
even in like March. We were there in April? No, we were there in January, right? I can't even remember when we were there.
Yeah, and where we were was, remember, we were in the Gulf,
it was
Gabby.
Freezing, you guys.
And that is way warmer than the water outside of the Gulf. The Gulf is way warmer.
So ultimately, So there have been some false findings of the Avengers over the years. In 1991, a treasure hunter led an expedition and thought he found the Avengers, but the serial numbers on the planes located did not match the serial numbers on the original Lost Patrol. And when they went back to more closely examine the wreck, they found that the serial numbers matched a flight that was lost 2 years before this one was lost, but the crew of that specific crash survived. The interesting thing is that between 1942 to 1945, there were 95 service members that died while training at the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale. These years were the 3 most intensive training years of World War II, and unfortunately, a decent amount of those training exercises sometimes had very morbid ends.
Yeah, I can only really imagine.
They keep finding planes in the area where they're like, oh, this is it. But no, it was just some other plane.
Yeah.
There was this one guy, he was a treasure hunter. I think he found like that one in 1991. He was like, oh, it's this one. And then eventually when he went back and so it wasn't, he said, oh, well, they wanted to sweep it up and quiet it down. So I just said it wasn't the plane. I don't know, you guys. Again, there is a lot of misinformation and conflicting accounts.
That is really bad. I don't mean to interject with this here, but it's one of those really interesting things when you see, especially the a dynamic. So, in order to be a pilot today, right? Like it's something that requires a degree. You can't just go in there with, a high school degree and become a pilot. Usually.
Can I go in as a biologist and become a pilot? But also, I think there are programs where you don't need a college degree, though.
For the military, it's normally a requirement that specifically you have to have a degree, and it's a long training program to specifically get in it, if I recall correctly. One of the big things, and this is a key difference between like the United States and China as an example, is that with the more sophisticated a plane that you get, the more sophisticated the tech, the more educated a person that you typically need. So,
oh yeah, you do need a 4-year degree to be a fighter pilot.
Yes, see,
but
exactly.
Can I be a fighter pilot?
So yeah, you probably could, but
I just was on record saying I would crash my plane to not have to fight. So maybe
you're not going to be allowed. You could, you're not allowed. And so China, and I think I'm going to cover this at some point, they're actually running into a lot of difficulty right now as they're modernizing a lot of their Air Force, in which the people within the military are typically way lesser educated than the people entering the civilian workforce. So what ends up happening in that scenario is they literally do not have the trained pilots required. And so every time that a war or conflict or something goes up, you need people that are specifically trained for it. It doesn't matter that you could literally just pick someone off the street and train them to be a pilot. You could, but they're not going to have the technical expertise or knowledge base to work with it, like when you need actual trained people, which was a big problem for militaries.
Huh, that makes sense. Well, I hope they figure it out. But here's my thing about pilots, right? Like fighter pilot. Back in the day, did they need a 4-year degree?
No. No, they did not. Not back in the day.
Did they just take random men and be like, you're up?
No, you usually had to qualify for it. Because remember, they don't have nearly as many of these planes. So you had to be approved for the program usually. Like you could go for it and try and be it, but you had to basically be able to prove it. And usually what they would do is they wanted people who were experienced that already were part of flight clubs, which was a big thing back in like the 30s.
What did your grandfather have to do? Because he was, what years was he a pilot?
He went to the Air Force Academy.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yes, he graduated as a second lieutenant from the Air Force Academy and became a bomber pilot.
Okay, that's cool. That is neat. I was watching Top Gun the other day. Totally relevant. Actually, it is totally relevant. I only got through like the first 20 minutes though, because then I fell asleep. And not because it was boring, just because I was sleepy. I just want to, before you guys cancel me, I don't know. People like Top Gun. I like Top Gun.
You love Top Gun.
I love the first 20 minutes of it. I've never seen Top Gun. But they were like really training and it was so competitive. They also slept with a lot of people, but that's not the point. Where was I?
I don't know. I think you got distracted by big machines and sex, which literally describes a lot of action movies.
Okay, I loved it though, because he was doing like really dangerous stuff and it kept getting him into trouble because they were like, you need to be responsible. You can't just be pulling stunts every single time you're in the air because you're unsafe. Which, ironically enough, Taylor himself was accused of just flying by the seat of his pants. Like that's kind of the approach to flight that he took. He wasn't really good with navigation and typically would just kind of do whatever. At least those were allegations that came out as they were investigating. So again, this is just hearsay. This is what people were saying.
So then when it comes to Flight 19, where are the wrecks?
Yeah. So in the ocean, more than likely.
Well, yeah, we know that. We know that
I mean, why are you
in the
asking me? I don't know. So even recent searches with expanded ranges have been unable to identify the wreckage. So how am I supposed to know? Maybe one day we will accidentally stumble across it, or maybe they will forever remain lost to the sea. However, the tragedy of something that in hindsight we think would have been completely avoidable will continue to be remembered by conspiracy theorists and researchers alike. If only Taylor had listened to his other pilots, if only he had listened to the instructor, if only he was relieved from duty that day, maybe things would have had a different outcome. But we don't know. Like, that's the thing. Someone did message me today and they were like, oh, I could have sworn they found one plane. But then I looked everywhere. Like they found a plane in the middle of a lake somewhere in Florida. They were like, oh, this is it. But it was like the wrong type of plane. They always find planes and they're like, it's that one, but it's a different one. Like it's different. it's not those planes. It's different planes.
That makes sense. And a lot of people just like to claim they want to jump in on like
It's
the
how they
mystery and the
found
action of it.
Amelia Earhart's plane like 50 times at this point. Like, guys, there were a lot of plane crashes, okay? As people love to message me, there's more planes in the ocean than submarines or something.
Oh my God. Do you know how
don't know
many
if that's
times
true,
I
but-
get messaged with random things of saying like, Stack, no, they found Amelia Earhart's plane. And it's just like some random article that they may have found, but
I
then it's like
believe
not.
them. And when I was in college, that same news broke, quote unquote news broke. And I believe them. I was so naive. And then like a few, like a year or two later, the news broke again. And I was like, wait a minute. So I'm very cautious. But yeah, if you guys do know if they found this plane, because I looked and the person was like, oh, I can't find it now, but I could have sworn. And I'm like, yeah, so I'm guessing. Maybe, I don't know.
Article may have been retracted.
Don't know. Because I got that message from like two people. One person said they'll look, and the other person was like, I don't know. They can't find the article now. So I don't know. Don't know where the planes are. If you know where the planes are, congrats. You're going to be really popular for like a week. Okay, but thank you all for listening. Please let us know what you would like to hear next. And thank you to our patron, Konstantin Nikolovic. Nikolovic? I can't say your last name. I'm so sorry. For the suggestion of today's episode. Please message me how to pronounce your name. I had a lot of fun writing it, and I look forward to seeing further suggestions of what you all would like to hear. Make sure to leave us a review as it helps us grow. And as usual, if you listen to this anywhere other than Patreon, feel free to email us for our sources. Have a nice day, everyone, and goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.